You might know John D. Rockefeller as the founder of the Rockefeller Foundation, endowed by John D. Rockefeller and chartered in 1913 for the well-being of people throughout the world, and one of the only decent things he ever did in life.
You probably know him best, though, from your history classes. Rockefeller was one of the most famous robber barons in American and world history for his monopoly of the oil industry via the Standard Oil Trust. He was also the world's first billionaire.
This might not seem like a big deal, but trust us, it was.
Like the board game, having a monopoly means to control the entirety of a good or service, and Rockefeller did just that, although not looking quite as dashing and innocent as the Monopoly Man. But first, let's backtrack.
John D. Rockefeller was born in Richford, New York on July 8 in 1839. When he was 16, his family moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and Rockefeller took on a number of small business ventures as a teenager. He soon landed his first real job as an assistant bookkeeper at Hewlett and Tuttle, commissioned merchants and produce shippers. He then worked his way up through the ranks.
A careful and studious businessman who refrained from taking unnecessary risks, Rockefeller sensed an opportunity in the oil business by the early 1860s. In 1863, he opened his first refinery just outside Cleveland in what would later become known as the Cleveland Conquest, or Massacre, depending on who you asked. Rockefeller even bought out his partners M.B. Clark and Samuel Andrews in 1865 after teaming up with them beginning in 1859. Less than a decade later, Rockefeller, founder of the Standard Oil Company, had near total control of the region's refineries.
Which leads us back to the original point. Rockefeller formed a monopoly, which is awesome for him and sucked for just about everyone else. His method? Horizontal integration, meaning buying out the competition except for the ones that don't want to be bought by controlling one area of production.
Of course, some people soon caught on to this and obviously didn't like that. Just as journalist Ida Tarbell wrote in her 1904 investigative piece, History of the Standard Oil Company, driven by instantaneable greed and pursuing his firm's interest above all else, Rockefeller conspired to obtain an unfair advantage over his competitors through secret preferential rebate contracts with the railroads that shipped oil. By dramatically and unfairly lowering his costs, he slashed prices to the point that he could make a profit, while his competitors had to take losses to compete. Sometimes he went even further, engaging in predatory pricing, lowering prices so much that Standard took a small, temporary loss, which it could survive given its pile of cash, while his competitors took a bankrupting loss.
Like any good capitalist of the era, Rockefeller's life revolved around making money. Interestingly enough, this actually led to him paying his workers above minimum wage and treating them fairly, but only because he wanted to prevent strikes, which were a really big trend at the time, before they started, and to keep from the press from getting too nosy about his business ethics, or the lack of them.
Total failure.
And did we mention that he also bought the 1896 election and contributed to a sense of campaign financing distrust by the general public ever since? Because he totally did. Rockefeller, along with J.P. Morgan and other Wall Street banking associates, gave heavily to Republican William McKinley's presidential campaign against silver populist William Jennings Bryan.
McKinley obviously won that one and converted the U.S. to the gold standard in 1900, making big business bankers everywhere in the U.S. very happy.
Anyway, it's estimated that Rockefeller controlled about 90 to 95% of the oil industry as a whole, so legality issues were expected.
The company faced legal issues in 1890 following the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act, enacted to prevent the combination of trusts that were used to stifle competition and form a monopoly. Furthermore, based on the provisions of the act, Rockefeller basically couldn't care less about going to jail or anything, as he refused to comply with what the act stood for.
This included combining trusts, an illegal act at the time. The act stated, "Every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations is declared to be illegal. Every person who shall make any contract or engage in any combination or conspiracy hereby declared to be illegal shall be deemed guilty of a felony and, on conviction thereof, shall be punished by fine not exceeding 10 million if a corporation or, if any other person, 100,000, or by imprisonment not exceeding 3 years, or by both said punishments in the discretion of
The establishment of a monopoly was also a felony under the Act, so much so that, according to its provisions, every person who shall monopolize or attempt to monopolize or combine or conspire with any other person or persons to monopolize any part of the trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations shall be deemed guilty of a felony and, on conviction thereof, shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $10 million if a corporation, or, if any other person, $350,000, or by imprisonment not exceeding 3 years, or by both said punishments in the discretion of the court.
So in 1911, Rockefeller was forced to split up Standard Oil into 34 smaller and independent companies after the Supreme Court rule on Standard Oil Company versus New Jersey came through.
Not that this was bad for him or anything, since the company's breakup caused the new individual companies to become far more valuable for its stock prices to rocket sky high. Because he was a major stockholder, Rockefeller's net worth grew exponentially with the dissolution and establishment of these new businesses. I guess it is safe to say what goes around sometimes gets lost.
Anyway, come 1897, after a difficult life of being a terrible person in general and an absolute business genius, Rockefeller retired to a quiet life of philanthropy with more money than most of us would ever know what to do with.
And a genius he was, considering that two major events in history, the Industrial Revolution and the American Civil War, inexorably depended on oil for the mass production of manufactured goods. Looking back on it now, it was probably a good thing that Rockefeller ran away, screaming and crying from fighting in the war, because now we have iPhones and Flappy Bird.
Rockefeller had always been a devout Christian and abstained from alcohol and tobacco. He fueled his energy into new projects.
Rockefeller funded the modern-day University of Chicago, at the time a small Baptist college in Chicago. He supported medical science research, and in 1903, General Education Board helps to promote education across the country, including at black schools in the South.
He spent his spare time leading Sunday school classes at the Erie Street Baptist Mission Church, giving out life lessons to children he hadn't employed in the past for cheap and easily replaceable labor, such as, the growth of a large business is merely a survival of the fittest. But then again, what would you expect from a man who ordered 39 drops of solar to close oil cans instead of 49 to pay production costs?
It is no wonder, with all the risks that he took and the gall he possessed, that John D. Rockefeller is worth $340 billion, proving that scheming and plotting against others certainly has its reward.